Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Timothy Freke. And as I mentioned before in these interviews, I listen to a lot of this stuff on my trusty iPod, usually about an hour a day, while brushing my teeth and cutting the grass and washing the dishes and eating breakfast and stuff. I'm just listening to spiritual interviews and talks. And I first came across Tim a couple of years ago when I was listening to a series on the Urban Guru Cafe. And, most of the people on that show are what you might call neo-Advaita folks, and they seem to be emphasizing the sort of not being anyone home and, nothing to do, and don't bother with practices because that implies a practicer, and so on and so forth. And then Tim came along, and it was like, whoa, how'd they let this guy in? Because he's telling he has a more complete picture, in my opinion. He's saying, yeah, that's all true, but there's also this. There's the other half of life which we're living. And I found that very refreshing and very inspiring. And I've kind of been on the lookout for Tim Freke audios ever since. Although in the last couple of weeks I've listened to them about an hour a day. So I've really been immersing myself in your world. And it's really been a joy. So let me just read a brief intro so people know who you are, and then we'll proceed. This is from Tim's website. Tim is a philosopher or lover of wisdom who is pioneering a simple new way to experience a profound spiritual awakening, which fully embraces our everyday humanity. He has spent his life exploring the awakened state he often simply calls the mystery experience. Tim has articulated his own evolutionary philosophy of lucid living, designed to help people go beyond ideas and actually experience a deep awake state, which replaces outdated spiritual jargon with clear new concepts which are simple to understand. He has also developed a profoundly simple mystery of the moment attention technique and a number of powerful eye-to-eye practices, that's capital I to I practices, which quickly awaken practitioners to the mystery experience and help them commune with others in oneness and big love. Then it goes on to talk about Tim's degrees and the many books he has written, about 20 of them so far, one of which was a top 10 bestseller in the UK and USA, which is called The Jesus Mysteries. And Tim kind of calls himself a stand-up philosopher, a concept he developed from the ancient idea of a philosopher as a traveling spiritual entertainer who transformed people's consciousness. I also take it as a sort of a take on the term stand-up comedian, because you have a great sense of humor, and I really appreciate that. And in light of the fact that you do, I'd like to start with a frivolous question, which you probably will give a profound answer to, which is, when you were in school, was your last name an asset or a liability?
Yeah, you can survive school with a name like Freke. You can just about do anything.
I mean, I can imagine one crowd saying, "Hey, Freke, get over here, I want to talk to you," and another crowd saying, "Whoa, man, that's a cool name."
Well, I think the great thing is, kids that can be very mean, so they'll find something. But with me, it was all so obvious. It was all laid out right there. Like, I want something, here it is, he's called Freke. And I think it's been an asset. I think it made me not take myself too seriously from a very young age. It meant that I had to be able to roll with the things that came towards me. And, I've enjoyed being a freak. I have. I've never ever regretted it or wanted not to be. So
yeah. The crowd I hung with, that was considered to sort of be a compliment. We called ourselves that. Oh, great. So you have a lot to say. I mean, you've written a lot of books, and as I listened to you, I kind of broke down what we might be talking about into several categories. One is, your own personal spiritual odyssey, starting from, I suppose, the most significant incident at the age of 12 and then moving onward. And then there's, what you teach these days as a teacher or a stand-up philosopher. And then there's your whole take on Christianity, which I think is fascinating. And I don't know if we'll get to cover all of these in this one interview, and if we don't, we'll do a second one in a couple of months. But let's start wherever you would like to start. Maybe with your own spiritual journey, that would be appropriate if you think. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's do that.
Well, here we are in this funny being alive business. Mm-hmm. And the thing which always struck me, Rick, and it still does all the time, is how strange our predicament is. that we're thrown into this incredible experience of being a body, of sensation, of just the whole gamut of life, which it is so, on the one hand, so beautiful, and then on the other, so cruel, where miracles happen and terrible things happen, and it's all thrown at us, and, we haven't got a clue what it is. And that has been the most central thing since I was a kid. We don't know what this is. And it used to amaze me that so many of the grown-ups that I would see as a child, as I do as now, they go about as if they know what this is. And nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows what it is. Isn't that amazing? I mean, that seems like the most significant thing about life, is that fundamentally, underneath it all, nobody knows what it is. And when I was about 12 years old, something happened when I went right into that mystery, and I really became consumed by it. And I was just an average kid, and sitting on this hill over my little sleepy hometown in the southwest of England where I grew up, with my dog, quite romantic really, the boy with dog on the hill, and just being with, what is life? What am I? Why is there suffering? All those big questions. And something happened. And at the time, I had no idea what it was. And in retrospect, of course, I had lots of ideas about what it was. And I would say now it was the first time I entered this deep awake state, or this lucid state I call lucid living. And the most important thing that I remember very vividly is entering this big space of oneness and love, this incredible love, just from nowhere, just like as if I'd slipped into this other world, which was just full, pulsating, just thick with love. And little Tim really just was overwhelmed. I was in tears, and it was just, I felt so loved, and also a strange sense that I was the loving Tim. And what that did for me was it resolved all my questions. And it didn't give me any answers, but it suggested that this thing, the question I could never quite ask, the really, really big question, life, the universe, everything question, it could never quite be said, and that the answer that I was looking for also couldn't be said.
So you were already asking questions at that age?
Oh, yeah. I'm as long as I can remember.
That's great. I mean, when I was that age, I was thinking, am I cool enough? How's my hair look? And things like that.
Yeah, I've got over that one. Thank you.
So, but from as long as you can remember, you had been sort of asking the deep questions.
Yeah, life's always seemed profoundly mysterious. Strange, just... And I had a profound... I mean, I remember, I must have been about 8 or 9, going for a walk with my father, and asking him these questions, and him looking down at me and going, well, Timothy, greater men than you or I have asked these questions and never found an answer. And I can remember, maybe with the arrogance of being a child, youth, but I can remember feeling, if there's a question this big, if life itself is a question this big, then there must be an answer this big. There must be a response this big. And what happened to me on the hill was that I found it. And what the answer was not words. It was not something intellectual. It was actually a change in my state of consciousness. And what that did for me is it set me off on a journey which has been my life, of trying to understand this shift in the state of consciousness, how it can happen, and going there again and again, and trying to get to know it, and sharing it with others has been a big part of it right from the beginning also, because I started to find as a teenager that I would enter just spontaneously. I had no way of making it happen. It was just, oh, here I am again, and would be in this big space, and I'd find that other people who were with me would start coming into the same experience.
Because of something you were saying to them, or just because of some silent contagion that was...
I think it's more like the silent contagion. I mean, certainly people would catch my enthusiasm because I'm quite enthusiastic about it, and that would help. But I think really it's that because we're all one.
Yeah.
And so when one of us moves, there's a good chance that people near us move also.
Yeah.
And also because it's really not very far away. In fact, it's incredibly close. It's right there waiting for us. so that when somebody moves into it, or I mean, this is the phenomena which gets turned into something very grand about being around special people. I don't believe in special people. I'm certainly not one. And what I see is that we're all like it. We're all special, and that when any of us come into this big love, or come into this deep awake state, then those around us do too. Which is why now what I do is I get people together to enter the state, rather than seeing it as it was for me, I think, in the 70s and in the 80s, where it was a very personal thing. It was all about something you did on your own, for yourself. You closed your eyes and you went within and you meditated and did all that. Was that actually it's something which is even better to do together.
Yeah, no, there's definitely that influence. I've been in groups of like 8,000 people all meditating together at the same time and all. It's powerful. Yeah. I would just sort of beg to differ slightly on the special people business. I mean, I know what you mean, because ultimately we're all the same person, and there's nothing ultimately or essentially special about anyone. But as reflectors, there's a difference between a 5-watt bulb and a 100-watt bulb and a 1,000-watt bulb. Some people seem to be able to kind of reflect this with much greater fullness and have a sort of a more catalytic influence on those around them than others, But it's the same light, like the incredible string band said, light that is one though the lamps be many.
Very nice. I think they might have taken that from Rumi. But yeah, you're absolutely, of course you're right. And it's like anything in life. There's some people who can, do amazing things with a football. There's some people who can do amazing things with music. There's some people that can do amazing things with this. I guess the place I've arrived at after many decades is that what's important is that we see it like that. Because what happens with when we elevate people, we actually create something which gets in the way of us realizing that it's in us. The old Buddhist line, which is kind of provocative, where they go, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him.
Right.
Whoa, okay, what's that mean? Well, what they're trying to say there, a very Zen line, is, look, if you think it's outside of you, you've completely missed the point. It's what you are. So my feeling is that we've since the kind of 50s, 60s, our own religious tradition really collapsed, and probably rightfully so, because it was moribund. But we brought in a lot of Eastern religion, some of which is absolutely fantastic and has had a massive influence on me. But we also brought in a whole load of things which were culturally alien and really don't help. And one of the things we brought in, which I myself was involved in for some time, is this idea that there are fully realized mega beings. And I think it gets in the way. This whole arriving idea, that there's somebody else who knows. And whereas my experience is that if you get to know these people, they turn out to be surprisingly like you and I. They're very good. They are extremely good at being bright lights. Wonderful. And we need them. All praise to them. And thank God they're there. But they're also human beings. Everyone is.
Absolutely.
And seeing that and seeing we're all in it together gets rid of this fantasy that there's somebody somewhere and I should be like them, if only I could.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, we're like we are. We're all like we are. And we're all caught in this polarity. We're all great souls and arseholes. All of us.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, one of my motivations in starting this show was I live in a small town, 10,000 people, where about 3,000 or so meditate. It's the home of Maharishi University of Management, which was founded by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And there are a lot of people walking around this town who've been meditating 30, 40 years, who still have this attitude of like, well, enlightenment must be like being like him, and I'm not like him, and therefore I must be like lifetimes away from it or something. And I think, as you're saying, I think that can be an impediment, and a lot of the trappings of a spiritual teacher have nothing to do with consciousness or state of consciousness or anything. They have to do with his cultural, conditioning and the way he dresses and the accent and the kind of food he eats and all that kind of thing. And a lot of people sort of attribute all those things to the state of enlightenment and say, well, that's what it's got to look like. But it doesn't have to look like that. It can look like...
It has to look like you.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to look like you. And I think personally, I spent decades chasing this idea of some permanent state. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I actually examine life as I experience it, what I see is that everything in life is flowing and mm-hmm. changing. The thing which is permanent has no qualities.
Exactly.
Now, you can know that, but the knowledge of it will move and change. And why I think I'm able these days to take people pretty quickly to a very deep awake state where you feel the big love, you don't miss it. There's no, it's not an abstract thing. It comes right down into your body. It is because if you take away that idea that it's some unachievable goal, it becomes something you can enter into straight away, and it becomes something natural. In that way, I guess my approach is much more Taoist. It's just natural. It's just there, waiting for you to step into it. And don't get a hang up about having to be perfect or the fact that you're human. Your humanity is great. It's what's so lovely about us. You're different to me. That's why it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And yet we can both come into this big love together.
Yeah. It's if you think about it, I mean, what this enlightenment thing is supposed to be is it's supposed to just be a recognition of the reality of life. And if it's the reality of life, it's got to be here already. It's not like some whole new, entirely different element is somehow going to jump in all of a sudden and surprise us. Whatever it is, the essence of it or the component of it must be in our experience right now. So it's
the
like
thing which is always there. I think that's what we're paying attention to the thing, and that's why it's so elusive. It's so elusive because it doesn't change. Because it's this permanent presence of awareness, which is what we are. It's always there. And we miss it because it doesn't move.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like, what if it were like a tone, and there's this tone playing, and it's always there. And at first maybe you think, okay, I hear this tone. And after a while, you tone it out, so to speak, because it's always there. But if at any point you wish to hear it, you just put your attention, oh yeah, okay, there's that tone still going on,
Yeah.
Of course, it's not a tone. It's just a metaphor.
No,
but
it's not. And that's the thing with all of these. We use metaphors because we have to.
Yeah.
It's not any of the metaphors.
One thing I find is that sometimes in more contrasting situations, it becomes more obvious. Like if I'm just sitting at my computer working all day, maybe not so obvious, but if I, let's say, have to travel and I'm rushing through an airport trying to catch a connecting flight and I'm out of breath and there's all this chaos, it's like it's almost though the silence becomes much more evident. It's in contrast to the chaos because it's a new situation or something.
I agree. I think newness is very powerful. And it's because when there's a new situation, we recognize the freshness of life. We're becoming conscious of the mystery. We're beginning to enter into the mystery of life. And when we're in habitual states, we don't notice the mystery. We don't even really feel alive. Yeah. We're kind of numb. And that numbness is where we don't feel it. So if you throw yourself into a new situation, even one which is quite difficult, there's much more chance oh God, I'm alive. What is this? This is happening. And as that occurs, there's much more chance. You become more conscious. And as you become more conscious, you notice these deeper states.
Yeah, and it's not only I'm alive, but it's like, okay, I'm out of breath, I might miss my flight, there's all these people, it's crowded, but even more predominantly perhaps, there's this deafening silence. There's this pure silence that just perseveres or continues in the midst of the chaos, and the contrast makes it more evident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is loud, the silence.
Yeah, in a way it is. So you kind of mentioned that you had this experience when you were 12, but then it wasn't a one-shot deal. You popped in, it kept popping in periodically after that, for no apparent reason. It just sort of...
Yeah. It would just happen, and I mean, I was very quickly looking for it and recognizing it and welcoming it. Mm-hmm. And it would change and get deeper and take me to all different places. And I was doing all that I could also to explore it. But what I found was that often the deepest moments of awakening wouldn't come when I was meditating or, I don't know, all the different things I was doing. It would come in a blues club or, a coffee bar or by itself. And I feel lucky for that. And because I didn't associate it, therefore, with, if I'd woken up for the first time, as many people do, in a temple or a church or doing this, then I would associate it with that. Whereas what's happened for me is that it's just happened naturally, so I associate it with being natural. And that leaves things wide open.
Mr. Natural.
Mr. Natural.
Well, you did sort of have that initial awakening on a hilltop, but I presume you didn't have to keep running up to the hilltop to have it again. It just sort of happened. And,
that's right, yeah.
And you didn't necessarily come down from the hilltop with stone tablets or anything. You just...
No stone tablets, no burning bushes, nothing. If only. Now I'd be running a religion, I'd be a rich man.
Yeah, really. You might get yourself crucified too. But
yeah, there's always that chance.
So did it take you long to kind of realize that this experience you had on the hilltop was something that others had had throughout history, and you began to read their books and so on, or it wasn't like you thought, we were able to put it in a context?
What a great question. Yeah, and I wonder, it's a long time ago, and memory plays tricks on you. So, it'd be interesting, God, if you could look back and actually see that my sense is that quite quickly, I know certainly within a few years I was reading the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita and was very influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and by the age of 16, 17 was involved with the guru and I think I certainly looked east. Ironically, I've written my bestsellers have been on the Western tradition. But, I personally, I found I like most of my contemporaries and the people that are a little bit older than me. And there was the East was opening up; it was arriving. And I can remember going to hear people talk about Maharishi and people like that when they just arrived and feeling like, oh, what's this? This seems to be about the same thing. These people seem to understand what I'm saying.
Did you go through a wild, crazy teenage phase, drugs alcohol and all that stuff?
Well, especially alcohol a bit, but I was fascinated by
psychedelics.
Psychedelics, yes.
Right.
My first encounter with really serious psychedelics was LSD, and I would still say that my first LSD trip was one of the most transformative and important experiences of my life, and utterly beautiful, utterly amazing, and I think then what I really felt was, oh my God, you can actually take something which opens up this space. Because for me, it really opened up the same space. It was, there was all the psychedelic stuff, which was fascinating and interesting, but underneath it, there was this profound love and oneness, just like it'd been on the hill and ever since. My goodness, that's interesting, isn't it? So, and I'd been reading, of course, Aldous Huxley and Ram Dass.
Right. Yeah, I was reading him the first time I did LSD. We sat around all night trying to figure out what bardo we were in,
And bizarrely, I have a dear friend, Peter Gandy, who I've written a lot of books with, who now lives at the end of my garden, or I live at the end of his garden, really.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Indeed, yeah. He calls me, my office. Basically, he lives in my old house. I've moved next door with my family, and my office is at the end of his garden.
I see.
In the 18th century England, they would have these magnificent gardens, and they fill them full of ancient sculptures or mock ancient sculptures, and they'd often employ what they called an ornamental hermit. He wasn't really a hermit. He just looked like he was a hermit, so it was part of the garden. So Peter calls me his ornamental philosopher.
Okay.
At the end of the garden. That's my role now. But he was there. He was there for my very first LSD trip and has been there ever since, really, just being able to dive into it. So the other thing which has happened for me, which is hugely lucky, is that I've shared the journey with many, many people, and with some people for decades. So we've been able to see it as, we're exploring this strange, what is it?
Yeah, it's cool. I was sort of charmed by your references to your lifelong friendship with Peter. It's really sweet to have somebody like that you can kind of grow with, that stays with you. We pass through many friendships in life, and a lot of times it's sort of like, meeting someone on a train station, and then our train keeps going, but you and he have stayed on the same train.
I know, it's strange. And actually, it's not just Peter. There's a few other very, very significant people that I've been lucky enough. I think, when you have these profound experiences with people, there is always a connection. And those connections have stayed solid over the years for me, and we've been touching base on the journey. So as you grow and change and you realize you've been wrong, which is what the journey really seems to be, constantly realizing you've been wrong. Oh, hey! Hey, come here. I've been wrong! Hey! Yeah, I've been wrong like this. Oh, wow. And then something new opens up. And I guess that's the other resistance I have to the idea of arriving, is that, to me, it's just endless. It seems like the journey is endless. And every time you think you've got somewhere, you're going to have you're going to be kicked up the arse and moved on, because you haven't. It's like there's always more. Life is big.
There's a T.S. Eliot quote from Burton Norton that I meant to print out to be able to read it at times like this, but it's something about, coming back home and discovering the place for the first time. You
arrive where you started, and you know the place for the first time.
Yeah.
That was a massive influence for me.
Oh, that's great.
Peter and I would sit when we were at school together, and we'd get together, a group of friends, some of whom are still on the path with me now, and we would read T.S. Eliot to each other, because he, there's a very different, very conservative kind of Englishman, or American really, but made it become English, and who just, the moment in the rose garden. That's what that moment of awakening is. He calls it the moment in the rose garden. Quick now.
Well, he was very much influenced by Vedanta, actually, by Eastern teachings.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. He was a Church of England man, but he was certainly very influenced also by he was an incredibly educated man and had great vision. And the four quartets, it's just one of those. It's a scripture. It's a scripture.
So, did it take you very long to realize that drugs weren't going to do it for you, and you were probably frying some brain cells, and you better get onto something more natural?
Well, I never. It always felt like it wasn't something I always took it very seriously, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it was never something I did a lot. It was something I did as a special event. It was always I was quite spiritual in those days, so it was always something which I did with great intent and saw as something important. Couldn't understand for the life of me people who were just sort of dropping a tab and watching TV. It was something which was important. So it never really fried me too much. In fact, I think it was just, for me, it was beneficial. I know for a lot of people it hasn't been, but it was. And that naturally led on to other. It was only ever a part of what I was doing anyway. It was like, right, you can get it through that. Oh, and you can get it through this, and you can get it through that. Oh my God, you can get it in all these different ways.
And I understand from listening to you that at some point you got into the 14-year-old perfect kid. What was his name? Maharaji or something like that?
Guru Maharaji. Yeah. That's right. That was the guru I had when I was 17. Uh-huh. So he was only a couple of years older than me. And another friend of mine was involved with him. And I became very involved for a while and traveled around the world and got blown away and practiced his knowledge. And yeah, it was great. It was great. But, eventually there was something wrong. There was something not right. And I guess that's again about that thing about, I've been wrong. Is like what keeps the journey moving is when you've been involved in something, you've given it your heart and soul, and then it's like, hang on. No, but now I've gained something, but there's something missing. And then you move on to the next stage of the journey.
Yeah. I kind of wouldn't use the word wrong. It's sort of like you're climbing stairs, and it wasn't like the step you were just on was wrong, but it's time for the next step. I know.
I'm more provocative. I just can't help myself. It's just in my nature. I just like the idea of being like, yeah. And I think a part of the reason I say this is because I think it's very good that you hold that with everything the whole time. That I have this whole set of ideas, a story I'm telling. And yet what makes the story interesting is when you move on and you go, ooh, maybe I'm wrong. And I think it's good to hold that the whole time so that the concepts are held very lightly. So you're growing and changing all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, when you arrive at each step, if you kind of have the attitude of, okay, this is the final step, there's no more climbing to be done, I'm staying on this step, forever, and everybody else should be on this step.
This is, really is, me for years, you had this idea of, if only I could arrive. And I could be some sort of Uber-Tim, some amazing, that's brilliant, woo. And then what's happened is being like, well, why would I ever want to arrive? Because the joy is the new discovery. The joy is the constant feeling of moving. And life itself seems to be saying that, doesn't it? It's just movement. Everything is moving and changing.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of zipping through your various stages that you've been through. We don't need to belabor them too much, but feel free to dwell on anything that's of significance that we might be skimming over. So what next? At some point you started to realize, well, maybe this whole guru trip isn't for me, and what did you turn to then for?
Well, I kind of, I tend to be quite an intense personality, I suppose. So it was like right in and then came out. Oh, loads of things, Rick. I mean, I had an outrageous year with an occult community, studying Western magic. I did lots of meditation, experimented with every sort of mind-altering substance I could lay my hands on and see what each one of them did. Read a huge amount of books, studied philosophy, went on meditative retreat for a year twice. Cutting myself off from things, and also meant my creativity has been part of my particular path. I've always been creating, so words, but also music, and just some way of trying to express the mystery as well, because that takes me deeper and opens up things. And
during all this, was there a sense of kind of desperation or yearning, or were you?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes,
awful periods of being dreadfully lost and.
Yeah.
It being really hard, and then feelings like, I'm sure you have them, where you're just like, everything's, I'm with it, and it's like magic, and every door opens, and then suddenly that ends, and you're back sitting there on your own thinking, oh no, I'm so lost, and it hurts, and why am I so useless, and God, I hate being alive, and then, oh God, it's so great to be alive, and so all of those polarities, yeah.
Did you find that over time, though, that it sort of, the negative ones sort of matured into the positive one, and that there's a more consistency of just smooth functioning and contentment, or do you still seesaw back and forth?
I think there is. The whole whoa, yes, oh my God, that is gone. Thank you.
Equanimity.
Yes. But I certainly wouldn't want to give anyone the impression that somehow like Tim Freke's life just goes. He doesn't. I mean, God, I was just today with my son in the hospital. He's very sick, and when those things happen, I'm a family man. It hurts, and you're worried, and But what's happened for me now is that I no longer see my human journey as somehow taking me away from my spiritual journey. They're the same thing. So that this deep love, this presence, this awakening, this lucid living, we can get into what these ideas mean later, but that's there. So I can dare to enter into my life just as it is and be Tim as he happens to be. And so there's periods which go, when I'm writing a book, there's periods where it's just, magic. And then there's other periods where it's really hard.
Yeah.
And that's life. And I don't expect that to be different anymore.
No, I mean, as long as you're alive, there's definitely going to be waves on the ocean,
And not only that, Rick, but it's like, I come to the place where it's like, I want that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a good thing you do, because you're going to get it whether you want it or not.
But there was a time when I thought I didn't want that.
Yeah, me too.
My dad died a little while back, and he was in immense suffering. He had a stroke. He could just move his one arm. He was lying in a bed. He was just calling out as best as he could, help, help, help. It was incredibly distressing. And I realized being with that there was this man who was my dad, who was dying, and it was shit. And yet within that there was also this incredible love that was there. Like the awakened state just holds everything within it, whatever it is, just holds it all. And that I realized that the idea that I could be with my dad and be unattached was horrendous to me. Or that I could not suffer because I was so enlightened was horrendous to me. What I wanted to suffer. He was my dad.
Yeah.
And so what I'm exploring now, which is really exciting to me, is that we can use the big space, use the deep awake space, to enable us to actually enter into our humanity and really just to be the vulnerable human beings that we are. We can go up, we go down, we go in, we go out, all the things which a human being does, and make that journey. But what the deep awake does for me is it allows me to do it, because otherwise it's just too much.
Yeah, that's well put. It sort of mitigates or buffers, or
that's a word I use a lot.
Provides a kind of a foundation on which the waves can rise even higher. Actually, I mean, you could use the analogy that in a small pond, if it tries to rise up in high waves, it'll just stir up a lot of mud. But in an ocean, it can rise up in great waves, much greater waves, because it has that ocean status, that depth.
It's a great old image, the ocean, and it's got a lot to be said for it, because our whole being is like that. It's our being isn't one thing. It's a whole spectrum which is held together. It's these two poles which maybe we can explore. But if you like the ocean, if the waves are going to rise and fall, and then there's this great stillness at the depths.
Right.
And the waves are individual, and the depth is all one, and those two sit together. Now, just being tossed around by the waves is a very, very difficult experience. But being able to allow the waves because there's also the depths, that changes the experience.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, because I'd say probably the majority of the world is stuck in the state of I am just a wave, and that's scary, and it's threatening, and I hate all those other waves, and or those waves should be more like me, or whatever. And then
coming to crash into me.
Yeah, and then there's a subset in the spiritual world these days of I am just the ocean, and there are no waves, and don't try to pretend you're a wave because you're not. Don't do wave things because it only reinforces your waviness. Just be an ocean.
I mean, you mentioned it in the introduction. The great irony for me is, when I started really working around oneness, it wasn't very fashionable, and Advaita had really not made it to this country, hardly at all. And so I'd been part of the problem, I would say.
Were you?
Because, well, in a way, I mean, in the sense that, what I wanted to do was I was having this extraordinary experience of oneness, and I wanted to share it with others. And so it was like, come out, there is no Tim, there is no you, it's just, there is a place where, my God, that's so obvious, and it's extraordinary to see. But now, as I said, the journey keeps moving on.
Right.
And ironically, there's now people teaching Advaita on every, the end of every road.
Right.
It's like I meet someone, that's great, it's like, that's great, how wonderful that can happen so quickly. And yet what I'm seeing is, now it's like, look, hang on, let's not lose the other pole. Let's not lose the humanity, because that's where the love is. That's where the feeling is. And you'll hear a lot of people tell you, don't get involved in that, the feelings, it's just, it just is. And it's like, it is just is, but it's not just is. It is, and it's appearing as this. How amazing.
Yeah.
And to actually enter into what the isness is appearing as, and to allow the human, not just to allow, but to truly engage with and enjoy or just surrender into, or whatever word works for you, the human adventure. That seems to me very precious, and that's what opens up this big love. And the irony, like I said earlier, is that once you get that, this all-elusive big state, the oneness, the big love, the deep self, opens up much, much, much more quickly. Because most people I meet think they can't experience that because they keep thinking they're just this. And once you just go, well, look, don't worry about that, that's going to stay. But see the other as well, not instead. It's like, oh, there it is. Oh, my God. Oh, wow. And there it is.
That's great. It's like I don't totally get where these people are at, some of them. I mean, they say, for instance, don't meditate because that implies the existence of a meditator. I mean, that to me is like saying don't eat because that implies the existence of an eater. I mean, you could say that about anything.
Can I use that? That's
yeah, absolutely. It's all yours, copyright free. and I really, sometimes I doubt myself. Sometimes I think, well, is there something missing in my development? Because I experience the non-person level of life, but I also experience the person level of life, and yet these people say they don't have that. There's no one there, and I think, well, maybe I haven't reached it yet or something. But then I think, no, it's actually the whole package. It's this and that.
I think it's a kind of, I don't know if I can convey this. It's something which I'm still working on knowing how to say, but it feels to me more like, look, there are options in what we experience. And you can focus on, anything. You can focus on golf. You can focus on music. You can focus on this deep oneness. And if you just focus on it, and it's amazing. And when you first come across it, it blew me away completely. To when I found that I could start coming into this and really got the what gets called the teaching of no self. But it's an option. It's not the only place you can look. And then it becomes, well, is that it's whenever you hear the word, it's just something.
Yeah.
You're talking to a reductionist.
Uh-huh.
No, it's just, whether it's a skeptic going, oh, that's just your imagination, or whether it's a spiritual teacher going, no, that's just your ego. It's like, well, not just. It's like, no, this is a very rich experience on many, many levels, and we can focus in all different ways. And that's great. Let's do that. And for me, I want to open up to as much of it as possible. And that includes, I tell you, it was having kids.
That'll help.
Having kids. Before I had kids, all of that stuff sounded really attractive. Life's just an illusion. My litmus test now is like, is that a good teaching? Would I teach it to my kids?
Uh-huh.
Now, or is that a total teaching? Would I teach it? Because, I'm not there with my kids. I don't want to, with them. They're just growing up. I'm not there going, you don't really exist,
Right.
Don't get an ego now. You don't exist. That'd be mad. I want them to come in, be strong, healthy individuals who will, through that individuality, I hope, awaken to this deep love and this deep oneness. That's what I want. I don't know. And then whether you get it on the Advaitic side, there's this kind of like, you don't exist, which I wouldn't say to my kids. And on the more New Agey side, there's plenty of just be in the moment, which I would also not say to my kids. Because they're far too in the moment. And my job is to get them into time. Because, it's like that constantly with kids, the battle is like, well, don't think just about now, think about tomorrow. And so what I see is, oh, look, hang on. This is interesting. So spirituality needs to become more mature. Mm-hmm. It needs to actually see these polarities, that we want to be both of this. We want to have the oneness and the separateness. We want to be like a little child dancing in the moment, for sure, because that's where you want to be. But also we want to be like, we've spent a long time becoming responsible adults who are dealing with time and have to live life as it actually is. And those are not, they can exist together. They do exist together already.
Right.
And all we have to do is be conscious that they exist together, and then suddenly there's this huge breadth to our experience rather than some one narrow focus.
I remember one time I was driving along with my mother and the car broke down, and rather than deal with the situation in some practical way, I kind of went into Advaita mode and just said the whole thing's illusion, sat down on the side of the road and pulled out a book of Shankara's Crest Jewel of Discrimination and sat there and started reading it.
Fantastic. Did the car probably mend itself?
No, it didn't.
If only, right?